Today I'm down in Southern California taking a look at the 2022 Honda Passport. For this model year, Honda has refreshed their mid-size two-row crossover to look a little bit more rugged, a little bit more in line with their pickup. The reason I'm coming to you from an off-road park is the same reason that I have an orange flag on the side of this Passport. This is the launch of the new TrailSport sub-brand. We're going to have TrailSport versions of the Ridgeline, the Passport, and the Pilot to start, but you can logically expect other Honda models to follow at some point. TrailSport is the ruggedized appearance package for the Passport that's really important to keep in mind because we don't see any mechanical changes for the TrailSport version of the Passport. According to Honda, that's going to come in the next generation of TrailSport products, really. So we just have a TrailSport logo there. We have TrailSport styling all the way around the vehicle. It's the trim level in the middle of the Passport lineup, and all-wheel drive is standard. But unlike some of the competition's off-road focused trims, this does not get any different axle ratios. It doesn't get a different transmission or a different engine. It doesn't get a locking differential in the rear, and no skid plates or recovery hooks all the way around. Recovery hooks are one thing that I would really love to see on the front end of a TrailSport model. To help the Passport fit in a little bit better with Honda's Ridgeline pickup truck, the front end design has carried over some of those design elements, including this taller, more upright hood right there, a little bit more cladding down at the bottom. We have LED fog lights right down here at the bottom of the bumper, standard front parking sensors, which is a nice touch, and then functional air vents on either side of the front end that helps relieve pressure, helps direct air around the vehicle. To create this generation of Passport, what Honda did was they took their successful three-row Pilot and they hacked a few inches off the back. That yields a mid-size two-row vehicle that's as wide as the three-row Honda Pilot. So if you're looking for a mid-size two-row that has a lot of cargo area in the back and a really wide second row, that's why you might want to take a look at this. And that makes this quite different than some of the two-row options that you might want to be cross-shopping with this. For some reason, a lot of folks have been asking me, how does this stack up against the Toyota Venza? Well, the Venza is considerably smaller than this, especially on the inside, because its close relation is not the Highlander. It's actually the RAV4, one step smaller. Obviously, the Passport and the Pilot are styled differently, but mechanically the big difference happens right back here where we don't have a third row, we have a slightly truncated rear end to give it better departure angles, but we still have a really big cargo area. Now, Honda did not move the second row seats rearward, and that's something I'll talk about in a bit. So depending on exactly what you're looking for, if you want more legroom, you'll find that in some of the competition, but this has a truly massive cargo area because the entire rear end, right about there, is all cargo area. Honda has promised that the TrailSport sub-brand will include much more off-road capable vehicles in the future, but for the moment, keep in mind that this gets no additional ground clearance versus the rest of the Passport lineup. We do have 60 series tires, which give you a little bit more cushion than you'll find in the Elite trim, but they're still on 18-inch alloy wheels, which are a little bit on the large side for obviously a rugged off-road vehicle. And you'll notice that even though these tires have sort of an all-terrain style to them, these are actually all-season tires, not all-terrain tires. So you will find slightly more aggressive rubber on something like a Subaru Outback Wilderness. If you plan on taking this a little further off the beaten path, you should keep in mind that there's only a small amount of underbody protection. This does not have a full skid plate package like you will find in some of the competition. Honda has tightened up the rear end styling to give this a clean and modern look. One interesting twist, however, we don't have full LED taillights back here. The turn signals are still incandescent, and for the price tag of the Passport, that's something that I wish Honda would have included. Let me know what you think about these two big exhaust tips down here at the bottom of the bumper. I have to say, I really love them, but I met some people here at this launch event that didn't really care for them. We have rear parking sensors, but they're not as well integrated as the front. If roof tent camping is in your future, the TrailSport and the Elite trims of the Passport get roof rails, but they don't have load bars standard. Under the hood, we find basically the same drivetrain that we had last year. It's a naturally aspirated V6 engine producing 280 horsepower, and there's still a 9-speed automatic transmission under the hood. If you were hoping for Honda's brand new 10-speed, you're going to be disappointed. You may have to wait till the next generation Passport for that transmission. But personally, I've never found anything wrong with the 9-speed. The very aggressive first gear gets you off the line quickly. You'll really notice that when you compare this to some of the 8-speed competition. And the 9th gear is pretty high, giving you better highway fuel economy. As before, this is available with either front-wheel drive or all-wheel drive, and it's all-wheel drive with a twist. There are two major components that separate this all-wheel drive system from the all-wheel drive system that you find on an Outback or a Santa Fe. The first one is that the rear axle is actually overdriven slightly versus the front axle, and that means that even when no wheel slip is occurring in a straight line, this vehicle can send more power to the rear axle. And you'll really notice that out on looser surfaces like the one that I'm standing on right now, out on sand, dust, ice, snow, etc. If you want a vehicle that can have a bit more of a rear power bias when you floor it, that's going to be this, and that's something that you will not get in the Outback, the Santa Fe, the Blazer, etc. Power on, there are definitely times where this, the Acura MDX, the Acura RDX, etc., they can feel like a rear-wheel drive biased all-wheel drive vehicle, because in those modes, that's basically what's going on. Up to 70% of engine power can go to the rear wheel, depending on the drive situation, and then 100% of that 70% can be directed to a single rear wheel. Depending on the drive mode that you're in, it can attempt to apportion power 50-50 in the rear. You'll really notice that in off-camber, off-road situations where one wheel is up in the air and the rear wheels are spinning together, because that rear axle essentially has the mechanical locker functionality. Now, it's not quite as durable as a rear-wheel drive vehicle with a 2-speed transfer case and a real e-locker in the rear, but this is probably the next best thing in terms of pure all-wheel drive capability. As with most Honda models for 2022, the Passport comes with a ton of active driver assistance tech standard, like radar adaptive cruise control and their aggressive lane centering system. It also has their very aggressive collision mitigating braking system and run off-road protection. Oddly optional, however, for a vehicle with this high of a price tag is blind spot monitoring. It's something that you will find on the TrailSport and the Elite trim, but not on the base trim. Front seat comfort is definitely excellent in the model that I've been driving today. I do wish, however, that this seat had a 4-way lumbar control, because that's something that I would definitely expect to see at the price tag that this can attain in its top-end trim. And it is something that you will find on some of the competition. We have a manual tilt telescopic steering column with a large range of motion, but you should know that the driver's seat doesn't have the same range of motion as the passenger seat. It is powered, but it lacks the adjustable lumbar support that we find in this model, but we do get a 2-position driver memory. This may sound like an odd distinction, but remember the Passport is based on the Pilot, not vice versa. And as a result, this shares some features with the 3-row crossover that you don't normally find in a 2-row vehicle, like this sliding second-row seat. This is a really handy touch. Even though we don't have as much combined legroom in here as you find in a Hyundai Santa Fe or some of the competition, not everybody has a sliding second-row seat, where if you did have even a 6-foot person here and a 6-foot person up front, you could slide this seat to this position, still have about 2 inches of legroom, be comfortable and safe, and really have an absolutely enormous cargo area there in the back. Or depending on the child and the child seat, you could even scoot this even further forward and have even more cargo area in the rear. We have also a really wide second row bench, because this was lifted directly out of that Honda Pilot. And still a reasonable amount of legroom. If I move all the way over to the right side of the vehicle, have this front seat all the way back in its tracks, I still have several inches of legroom left. These second row seats also recline. The recline mechanism is not terribly aggressive, and they fold completely flat. You can use that lever right there to fold them flat, or you can do it from the cargo area in the back. Speaking of that cargo area, it really is huge, and you can see how much extra room you get by scooting that second row seat forward. Over 40 cubic feet of cargo space back here, versus something like a Grand Cherokee. The cargo area load floor is lower, and there's more cargo room under the cargo divider. Large storage area right there. You could definitely put a lot of knickknacks, and over here we have a nearly full-size spare tire. As you can see at T165, this is still a compact spare, but it's definitely bigger than I had expected for a modern vehicle. There's a little bit of storage room right over there, and I suspect if you really wanted to, you might be able to stick a slightly larger spare back here, but you will have to live with the cargo load floor being a little bit higher than normal. As with the seating, the majority of this interior is shared with the Honda Pilot, so we have a pretty standard sized moonroof with a manual shade just over the driver and front passengers' heads. The second row doors there have integrated sunshades in this particular trim. TrailSport logo embroidered right there on the front headrest. Lots of orange stitching in this model. The seats offer perforations in the leather upholstery, but these seats are not ventilated. They are just heated. Honda wasn't terribly aggressive on the seat bolstering, so larger drivers and passengers shouldn't have any problem with these seats. Moving on over to the front doors, we have a lot of premium materials here. A little bit more than you'll find in the average 2-row crossover like a CR-V or RAV4. Hard plastic still down there at the bottom of the door to improve durability, like the cup holder, bottle holder, storage areas right there. Moving over to the dashboard, lots of soft touch materials going on here as well. Sort of an imitation metallic strip running right there across the dashboard. I think that's supposed to be sort of an imitation knurled metal feel. In the middle of the dashboard, we have one of Honda's newer infotainment software packages. It's not their absolute latest, but does feature smartphone integration, and it's certainly better than the one that we find in the current generation CR-V. The screen is a little bit on the small side compared to some of the competition, however. Moving down from there, we find the controls for the tri-zone automatic climate control system. That's a really cool touch for a 2-row vehicle. That's again because this shares a lot of things with the Pilot, which is 3-row. Engine start stop button there, controls for the heated seats, Qi wireless charging mat right down there. It's just about big enough for my large smartphone. Right over here we have Honda's Hunt and Peck style shifter. Drive, Sport right there. This is the drive mode selector. It allows us to choose between normal, snow, mud, and sand. button to disable the auto brake hold there, 2 very large cup holders, and a really huge center console storage area. You can see at the moment I have tons of random things in there, big suction cups for cameras, etc. And we have a roller style cover to close that area off. Moving over to the driver's side, we have a 7-inch approximate LCD instrument cluster there with 2 physical gauges on either side. The display features digital gauges, the trip computer, and a status of the all-wheel drive system. Moving out from there, we have a round 4-spoke steering wheel, split bottom spoke right down there. Controls for the infotainment system are over here on the left, along with paddle shifters on the back, down on the left, up over here on the right. You'll find the controls for the adaptive cruise control system right over here with the lane centering option, that button right there. Naturally, for the launch of the TrailSport, we're out here on a trail in Southern California. To be honest, this trail is not overly technical. I guess I should clarify that by saying it is technical for a vehicle like the TrailSport, but obviously off-road folks out there in Wranglers and Broncos, etc. are not going to think that this trail is terribly complicated. Remember that this is still on all-season tires, not all-terrain tires, even though they do have a slightly more rugged sidewall look to them that doesn't turn them into all-terrain tires. This also doesn't have any additional underbody cladding, so this is sort of a step behind what we see perhaps from Subaru in their Wilderness lineup, so no skid plates underneath the vehicle. That's why they're really wanting us to avoid rocks out on this particular trail. As I said at the beginning of the video, at the moment TrailSport does not give us any extra ground clearance, any extra underbody protection, any bumper changes really, etc. As far as structural changes, that's all coming in the future. But at the moment, keep in mind that this Passport is not really going to be any more or less capable than a regular all-wheel drive Passport. As far as all-wheel drive system capability goes, that's absolutely not a problem because IVTM4, also known as Acura Super Handling All-Wheel Drive to be honest, is well suited to both situations, trail driving like this and just sporty driving on a curvy winding mountain road. I think a winding mountain road is perhaps a little bit more of a natural environment for this Passport as a result. In addition to sending more power to the rear axle than most competitive systems, this has a torque vectoring rear axle which can at times act like basically an electronic limited slip. It can effectively lock the clutch packs together in the rear to give you 50-50 power distribution across the rear axle, or it can torque vector. Now, in most of the off-road modes, this system is going to try and give you either a mostly open differential or a little bit of a limited slip style feel back there, trying to split power 50-50 across the rear. You're going to notice that in the sand mode and in the mud mode for the electronic all-wheel drive system. One thing that surprises me is that the Passport still does not give us a sport mode for the drive mode selector right here. That's something that I would love to see for out on your favorite winding mountain road where it would make that torque vectoring even more aggressive. Off-road trims are definitely a very trendy thing for car manufacturers to do, and that's why we're seeing a real proliferation in the number of off-road trims available in America, including the new TrailSport sub-brand from Honda, the Wilderness trims from Subaru, etc. But as far as comparisons go, as far as roads or trails like I'm on here, Wilderness does up things to a different level. With Subaru's Wilderness, we get increased ground clearance. We actually have all-terrain tires from the factory. They're not the most aggressive all-terrain tires, but they are there right from the factory. And we get a little bit of underbody protection with some factory accessories that can be installed by your dealer for even more protection. If I were to take my own vehicle out on a trail like the one that I'm on here, I would definitely want recovery hooks, and that's something that we don't see on the Passport. Yes, the Passport does have a spare tire, and yes, you could put more aggressive all-terrain tires on this vehicle that would help reduce the possibility of a flat tire out on trails like this. But on any vehicle, there's always the possibility of getting in a situation where you may need some assistance. You may need to tow the vehicle out, you may need to pull the vehicle one way or another on a trail, and with the Passport, the only option you have is to strap around one of the wheels and pull the vehicle that way. It's not the best way to recover in an off-road situation. And that's the main reason that out on this particular trail, Honda has some spotters. You can actually probably hear them on this radio right here, directing us around some of the obstacles that are not overly severe, but they're definitely something that you need to keep in mind if you're going to be driving a vehicle like this out on off-road trails. You don't want to end up with body damage, you don't want to end up with a flat tire, you don't want to scrape up a wheel. As far as all-wheel drive system capability goes, the Passport does very well. The system is logically not going to be quite as capable as some of the systems that you'll find in Jeep Grand Cherokee, but this is certainly going to be more capable in terms of its off-road ability and, interestingly, its on-road driving ability versus something like a Hyundai Santa Fe. It's really obvious in some of the situations that we've been driving out here where we have one wheel off the ground. This setup is definitely better at that than something like a Hyundai Santa Fe or a Chevy Blazer. But again, not quite the same level as something like a Jeep Grand Cherokee. And I think that Honda has really hit a good sweet point with the Passport If you are interested in going a little bit further off the beaten path and you're willing to upgrade the tires yourself, this is going to be an excellent platform to do that on. But there is one big caveat with that, and that is the suspension tune in the Passport. It's definitely a bit sportier, a bit more on-road focused than something like a Subaru Wilderness. The rear axle that we find in the Outback Wilderness isn't capable of torque vectoring, and it doesn't have the limited slip functionality that we find in this vehicle's rear axle, but it does have a better suspension tune. If you are planning to spend an hour or 2 hours or so out on a rougher gravel road or a forest trail or something like that, it's going to be much more comfortable in the Outback. And at least for me, the suspension in the Passport is just a little bit too firm for me to want to be in this vehicle for hours at a time out on trails like this. Can the Passport do it? Absolutely. But you're going to be more comfortable out on trails like this for hours at a time in something like an Outback. On the other hand, the Passport is certainly going to be more engaging on your favorite winding mountain back roads. The important thing is right vehicle for right application. How much time are you going to be spending on those off-road trails? If it's occasional, this may be actually a better blend, because on-road driving is definitely better in this than some of those off-road oriented vehicles. And this is certainly going to be just as capable as a wide variety of other crossovers out on trails like this. But if you do plan on doing this sort of thing very regularly, then you might want something with a more compliant suspension. Back to on-road driving dynamics, one big reason that Honda did not put all-terrain tires on the Passport and instead went with all seasons is ride quietness and on-road practicality. All-terrain tires definitely have a toll on on-road handling ability and cabin quietness, and for the average person that's buying a Passport, I think that Honda was absolutely correct to do what they did with the TrailSport. Unlike going from an Outback to an Outback Wilderness, there is no penalty as far as handling, cabin noise, fuel efficiency for the TrailSport. All of those are basically the same as the rest of the Passport lineup. Bottom line, out on the road or out on the trail, the Passport is a very well-composed and I think well-balanced option. Yes, there are going to be more off-road capable vehicles out there. There are going to be more on-road capable vehicles as well. But I think that Honda has chosen the right balance, giving you the sort of trail-ready looks without many of the compromises that we find in many of those trail-ready vehicles. So if you're the kind of person that likes the look but doesn't necessarily need to go out on a trail like this every weekend, the Passport's going to be a really good fit. If, on the other hand, you are planning on occasionally going to a state off-road park, or you just want to take your vehicle further off the beaten path than the average crossover, then you might not want to take a look at the Passport. You might want to take a look at something like the new Grand Cherokee or something like a Subaru Outback Wilderness, which I think is really perched on the fence between worlds. It's still definitely capable on-road, but it's certainly a little bit more capable in some situations than the Passport, just based on the decisions that Subaru made when designing that vehicle. Out on the paved road, the Passport is really in its element. It has good, strong acceleration thanks to that really low first gear on this 9-speed automatic. At higher speeds, there can be just a hint of torque steer, but at all the lower speeds and initial launch, this really has a great feel to it, thanks to the IVTM system. Now remember that when Honda says up to 70% of engine power can be sent to the rear axle, that doesn't mean 70% of engine output across all engine output profiles or all situations. And you will definitely notice that out on the open highway. If I floor it here at 60 miles an hour, most of the power is going to the front axle. And at 60 miles an hour, that's just fine. The combination of torque vectoring in the back and the ability to send more power to the rear makes this feel more engaging than the Chevy Blazer or the Toyota Highlander, which have a somewhat torque vectoring rear axle, but they're not pushing as much power to the rear. And it's that combination that makes this feel more engaging and more nimble out on the road. As far as on-road driving dynamics go, the pinnacle of the Passport lineup is going to be the Elite trim. That's where you're going to get the widest tires, the lowest profile tires, and I think that fits the personality of this all-wheel drive system the best, because it is definitely a lot of fun to drive. Now let's get to the nitty-gritty. How much is a 2022 Passport going to set you back? Well, the first thing to know is that it has become significantly more expensive than last year because of the way that Honda has chosen to reshuffle the options deck. This now starts in EXL trim. And that's going to be $37,870, plus of course tax, title, license, and that destination charge. That's going to get you leather trim seats, the blind spot information system, all the standard safety tech, and of course front wheel drive. If you want all-wheel drive, you can add it to that EXL model, or you could get the TrailSport. This TrailSport would bump things up to $42,470. If you want everything on your next Passport, that's going to be the Elite trim at $45,430 starting. In terms of pricing, the Passport has leapfrogged some of the competition, and this is now much more similar in terms of its price tag to more expensive entries in this category, like a Jeep Grand Cherokee. This is going to be significantly more expensive than a Subaru or, of course, the Hyundai Santa Fe. Now keep in mind that the Outback and the Santa Fe both start with 4-cylinder naturally aspirated engines, and that's one of the reasons that they're so inexpensive compared to this. Their price tags are more in the realm of a CR-V in terms of their base starting price. When you add options to them, however, they can get close to the price category of the Passport, but this still manages to be just a little bit more expensive than some of them. Let's be honest, the Passport, including this TrailSport trim, isn't the most off-road capable vehicle in this mid-size two-row segment. If you're interested in daily off-roading, you'd be buying something else. But the Passport is still one of my favorites because it is very, very practical. It looks good, it's decent on fuel economy, it has a nice V6 engine under the hood, it's definitely going to be more reliable than some of the other alternatives out there, and we have a huge cargo area in the back. The back seat is definitely going to be more practical for families that have maybe 1 or 2 kids and you don't need that third row, but you do want a lot of storage space in the rear. A lot of the attributes that make some of the competition more off-road capable make them less practical and less daily driver livable. Something like a Jeep Grand Cherokee is not necessarily going to handle better than this, even though you can get it in rear-wheel drive, because of some of the compromises that are inherent in a more off-road focused vehicle. The torque vectoring rear axle that we find standard on all-wheel drive versions of the Passport is definitely going to make this feel more engaging than something like a Hyundai Santa Fe or a Chevy Blazer. The Blazer does have an available twin clutch rear axle, but it's not quite the same as the axle that we find in this. This is certainly going to be more dynamic out on your favorite winding mountain road. And again, I can't stress this enough, an absolutely enormous cargo area in the back. On the downside, there are certainly less expensive options in this segment, namely the Outback and the Santa Fe, so let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section below. If you were interested in spending about $40,000 on your next two-row crossover, would you be taking a look at something like this? And are you interested in the TrailSport trim? I'm actually a little surprised that Honda chose to launch this out here in this off-road park. For a long time, they've really stressed the off-road capability of the Pilot and the Passport, including this new TrailSport model, but the vehicle is not really at home, I have to say, out on some of the trails that we've been driving today. The suspension is definitely very, very firm in this compared to something like a Grand Cherokee or a Subaru Outback that are a little bit more balanced when it comes to on-roading and off-roading. This is more of an on-road focused vehicle. It definitely has the all-wheel drive system to tackle bigger challenges. It has the ground clearance to tackle those challenges as well, but I think this is better suited to daily driving, snow driving, etc. The ground clearance will give you all the clearance you need for the average suburban snow experience, and the traction is absolutely excellent. What sets this back a bit out on the trails again are the lack of all-terrain tires. We have all-season tires. And then the vehicle is just sprung very firmly. There's not a lot of suspension travel. You will definitely find more suspension travel and more ability to handle moguls and things like that in some of the more off-road oriented competition. But still, absolutely excellent. This should definitely be on your shopping list if you're looking for a mid-size two-row crossover. If you've had a CR-V for a while and you think, hey, this is a little too small for me now, definitely put the Passport on your shopping list. Be sure and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already done so you can be updated on all of my latest videos, including a full video on this just as soon as I can get this back at home, and of course all the other videos that you'll find here at Alex Autos. You can also find me over facebook.com/AlexAutos, Instagram, Twitter, all those other social places, and of course check out the merch store at aoamerch.com. I'll see all of you later.